Waiter who insulted Big Shaq didn't know he owned the restaurant. Midtown Manhattan, 6:30 p.m. The streetlights reflected off the damp pavement after a light evening rain. A stream of cars moved slowly past golden-lit glass towers, where every movement seemed choreographed to a rhythm of luxury and precision. At the heart of this bustling neighborhood stood the Monarch Room, a beacon of elite sophistication. A place where each piece of silverware was numbered, every wine glass had a dedicated steward, and a dinner for two could easily surpass $1,500 following the standard 5-course menu. Inside the restaurant, crystal chandeliers hanging over 3 meters high bathed silk-covered tables in a warm glow, accompanied by soft jazz from a live quartet tucked in the corner. Tonight's clientele were mostly familiar faces from Manhattan's finance and fashion circles. A group of tech executives toasted to an $80 million Series B deal. Nearby, a lingerie model and her manager discussed an upcoming campaign for Paris Fashion Week. Everything shimmered, from the gazes to the outfits. Tom Ford suits, Patek Philippe watches, sequined Versace dresses. The glass door rotated open with a soft whoosh. A breeze slipped in, and with it, a figure of unexpected magnitude. Shaquille O'Neal, 7 feet 1 inch, nearly 330 pounds, a physique like sculpted bronze, walked in. No bodyguards, no sunglasses, no entourage. Nothing to suggest that he was one of the wealthiest athletes in America, with an estimated net worth north of $400 million. He wore a lightly wrinkled gray t-shirt, faded Adidas track pants, and an old pair of Nike sneakers with frayed soles. No watch, no phone, no designer bag. He looked like any middle-aged man who had just left a nearby gym, but it was precisely this simplicity that concealed his identity. He was one of the primary investors in this restaurant chain, and the one who chose the wall colors and culinary style for the Monarch Room since day one. But no one there knew that. Or rather, no one cared to consider it. The moment Shaq stepped in, eyes from the bar and nearby tables snapped to him, not in recognition, but in discomfort. In a place where every detail was curated to exude refinement, from the fold of a napkin to the piping on a waiter's jacket, his presence felt like a misplaced brushstroke on a classical canvas. At the host stand, Beryl, the lead hostess for the evening, looked up from her reservation screen. She was 29, had worked at 3 Michelin-starred restaurants in 4 years, and took pride in her ability to read a wallet by sight. Hair in a flawless bun, wine-red lipstick, sparkling Cartier watch. To her, the Monarch Room wasn't just a workplace, it was a stage to showcase her own refinement. When her eyes landed on Shaq, her lips tightened, not in surprise, but judgment. She scanned him top to bottom, 1 second, 2, 3. Her gaze moved from his t-shirt, over the worn pants, and stopped at the sneakers, one shoelace untied. She didn't know who he was, but it didn't matter. Only one question played in her mind. How did someone like that get past the front door? Beryl stepped forward, a forced smile on her lips, but eyes cold as steel. Her voice rang clear, deliberate, just loud enough for nearby diners to overhear. Good evening. This is a fine dining establishment. Are you certain you're able to dine here? The room hushed for a moment. A man at the corner table looked up from his wine. A young couple exchanged glances and stifled a laugh. A staff member polishing glasses paused mid-wipe. Shaq smiled. A warm, deep, unfazed smile. I'm certain, he replied, his bass-like voice resonating in the soft ambiance. If there's an open table, I'd like to try a dinner here. Shaquille O'Neal merely lifted the corner of his mouth in a smile. a smile that was neither mocking nor needing to prove anything. "I'd like to experience dinner here," he said, his voice deep and warm, as solid as granite. For a moment, Beryl hesitated, as if she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. No one she had ever subtly filtered out had responded with such calm confidence. But she quickly regained the chill on her face, exhaled lightly, turned, and gestured for him to follow. The hallway leading into the main dining area was the most meticulously designed space. On both sides stood wine cabinets taller than a person, displaying vintages from the most renowned regions. Chateau Margaux, 2005, 2,100 per bottle. Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, 1999, 14,000 per bottle. On the dinner tables, Norwegian King salmon tartare was being served atop chilled stone plates, accompanied by fresh Japanese wasabi. The space was crafted to make one feel like they were dining at a gala in a museum. Shaq silently followed Beryl past rows of tables, where curious and somewhat puzzled glances began to drift toward him. Some recognized him, some didn't, but all shared a single thought. What's someone like him doing here? At table 7, 2 tech CEOs were raising glasses of Bordeaux Saint-Julien, 2008, worth $620. One of them tilted his head, murmuring to his companion. Probably came through the wrong door. Looks more like a brew stop guy from across the street. Beryl glided past them and stopped in front of table 19, the second to last table, tucked near the auxiliary kitchen entrance, where staff pushed carts and brought out food. The wall had a faint stain that hadn't been repainted. The tablecloth was slightly wrinkled at one corner, something never acceptable at the central tables. She placed the menu on the table with a deliberately firm thump, a sound that landed like a heavy period. Then, as if to finalize the performance of subtle condescension, she leaned in and spoke slowly, just loud enough for a few nearby tables to hear. "This seems like it suits your style." Shaq didn't respond immediately. He pulled out the chair, sat down gently, and slowly adjusted it to avoid bumping the wall. His eyes moved over the menu without a hint of irritation. Meanwhile, Beryl turned and walked away, her 5-centimeter heels tapping crisply on the wooden floor, each step like a silent declaration of victory. Another server passed by, pausing when she saw Shaq seated at the quick turnover table. She hesitated, then quickly lowered her head in greeting. "Good evening, sir. May I get you some water first?" Shaq nodded. "Just plain water, thank you." At table 12, Gwen, a real estate executive who had just finalized an investment deal for 3 buildings in Queens, had been observing the entire scene. She leaned over and whispered to her dining companion. "That server." She deliberately tried to belittle him. "Did you notice?" The man nodded. The thing is, he didn't react at all, and that's exactly what's throwing her off. Near the kitchen, the head chef glanced out and saw Shaq. He frowned, not because of Shaq's presence, but because that particular table was never assigned to distinguished guests. But Beryl had made the call on her own, without informing anyone on the management team. In a dimly lit corner of the Monarch Room, a giant in workout clothes sat amid an atmosphere of refinement and glamour. But unlike anyone else there, Shaq didn't have to try to belong. His confidence didn't stem from designer labels. It didn't come from a glittering watch or a black card. It came from the quiet assurance of someone who knows exactly what he's worth. And that very confidence was beginning to shake the hidden foundations of prejudice that Beryl, and perhaps many others in that room, had built their world upon. Beryl briskly returned to the service counter, but her eyes continued to glance toward table 19, where Shaq was seated. She couldn't hide her frustration at seeing him still smiling calmly. In her mind, that large man should have been flustered, uncomfortable, or at the very least, visibly out of place. But no, he sat there too composed, too at ease, as if he were the owner of the place. She lowered her voice, speaking to Jake, a staff member who had only been working there for 3 months and was checking the digital menu beside her. People like that only show up to make a scene. I bet you he's going to order the most expensive dish. That whole I can afford it attitude, you know. Just wait till it's time to pay. Jake furrowed his brows. He didn't respond, only gave a small nod to avoid confrontation. But in his eyes, there was hesitation and disagreement. Meanwhile, at table 3, the Welsh family, an elderly couple retired after decades in diplomatic service, quietly observed. Mr. Welsh, hair silver but eyes sharp, gently shook his head. That man, there's something oddly calm about him. Do you see it? The way he watches everything, the way he ignores that unprofessional attitude. That's the demeanor of a true leader. Mrs. Welsh nodded, gently swirling a $120 glass of Sancerre in her hand. Those with real strength don't need to speak loudly to carry weight. Shaq sat there, fingers loosely interlocked, his gaze slowly sweeping across the room. A jazz trio in the corner began to play Blue and Green by Miles Davis. He listened, then gently nodded along, tapping the rhythm softly, as if simply enjoying a quiet evening among strangers. But no one saw him as a stranger anymore. One by one, the eyes that had once judged him turned back, not with suspicion, but with curiosity, and slowly, admiration. At the table behind him, Gwen was still watching Beryl. She turned to her dining companion, voice low but clear. It's been over 15 minutes, and no one's asked if he wants to order. Yet she's passed his table like 3 times. Her friend shook his head. That's not service. That's control. And that's what's truly disturbing. Another couple, the husband and investment fund director from Soho, had also begun to take notice. He pulled the napkin from his lap and placed it on the table, speaking quietly to his wife. I think I saw that guy on CNBC last week. Shaquille O'Neal. He's no ordinary man. His wife looked up, her expression shifting. If that's really Shaq, then they're embarrassing themselves. And at the center of it all, Shaq remained silent. He didn't rush, didn't ring for a waiter, didn't scroll his phone or appear bored. He just sat there, like a lighthouse unmoved by the crashing waves around it. Behind him, Beryl was mixing drinks for a VIP table. She placed 2 lava smoke cocktails on a silver tray and walked past Shaq's table. And this time, she didn't glance at him. But that very omission was what began to unsettle many diners. An elderly woman nearby, Mrs. Hamilton, set her teacup down and gently said to her granddaughter, "That is not how you serve someone. That's a posture of contempt. No matter who the person is, a server has no right to do that." At the service counter, Jake turned to Beryl and softly asked, "He still hasn't ordered?" Beryl shrugged. No need to rush. He's still soaking in the ambiance. But inside, something was gnawing at her. That familiar certainty she always felt when she read a guest suddenly didn't feel so sure. What Beryl hadn't realized was that she was losing the very game she had set up. She wanted the guest to lose composure, but it was Shaq's calm that was exposing the smallness of her service. Second by second, through the shifting eyes all around them. And the price of that arrogance was growing heavier, not because Shaq did anything, but because he didn't need to. The atmosphere inside the Monarch room at that moment was like the surface of a lake when a gentle breeze passes through. Outwardly calm, yet rippling beneath with subtle waves of discomfort, curiosity, and doubt. After deliberately ignoring Shaq for more than 20 minutes, Beryl finally returned to table 19. Holding a leather-bound menu, she walked slowly, as if entering a performance in which she was the main act. No one had called her over. Shaq hadn't gestured, but she came because she felt the need to teach a lesson. Stopping beside the table, Beryl set the menu down, leaning slightly, her gaze probing and tone icy, as if she were speaking to an outsider. She didn't ask, "What would you like to order?" as servers usually do. Instead, she pointed directly to a corner of the menu, where the most expensive dish was bolded and boxed with a detailed description. Filet mignon Rossini, $350. Dry-aged black Angus tenderloin, seared with French foie gras, Alba white truffle demi-glace, served with Comté AOP, mashed potato cake. She deliberately emphasized the price, then asked, "Do you need me to explain the cost?" From table 14, Gwen furrowed her brow. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Beside her, her friend, a specialist in interpersonal psychology who had been watching from the beginning, leaned in and whispered, "This isn't service anymore. This is a power play. Classic gaslighting." Shaq looked up, his eyes radiating a calm that defied belief. He didn't smile, nor did he show any sign of anger. Just a steady, sincere gaze, enough to make the person in front of him feel like they were looking in a mirror. "I'll have that," he said, his voice even, soft as breath, but resonating like a bell in Beryl's mind. She froze. The answer was too simple. No hesitation, no nervousness. None of the signs she wanted to see to satisfy her sense of control. And because of that, it unsettled her even more. Beryl blinked, trying to maintain composure, then forced out a bitter, awkward remark. "Oh, well, I hope you can actually enjoy it. Not everyone's used to food like this." At that moment, a few nearby diners subtly turned their heads. In their eyes, it was clear that their patience with Beryl was wearing thin. A young man in a Ralph Lauren suit muttered quietly to his companion, "Who does she think she is? A Michelin chef?" Farther off, the Welsh family continued to observe silently, like two judges watching a covert courtroom unfold. Mr. Welsh whispered, "She's backing herself into a corner, just hasn't realized it yet." But Beryl wasn't done. As she walked away from the table, she deliberately slowed, turned her head back, and tossed out one more remark, this time loud enough for several nearby tables to hear. "Well, if that dish is a bit too elevated, we also have a Wagyu burger, just $58, much easier to enjoy." Shaq simply tilted his head slightly, saying nothing. Instead, he continued flipping through the menu, focused as though choosing a wine, not ignoring her insult, but rising above it. At the bar, Jake overheard the comment, his eyebrows knotting together. He opened his mouth to speak, but Beryl's glance cut him off, sharp as a blade, signaling, "Don't." But the discomfort building in Jake had reached its limit. Behind Shaq, the music shifted to Autumn Leaves. The melody breathed softly into the already heavy air. He leaned back slightly, arms folded, as if listening to the symphony of human nature, letting others reveal themselves in full. A test of service had just taken place, but the one being tested wasn't the guest. It was the staff. And if this were a test of professionalism, dignity, and composure, then clearly, Shaq had passed with ease. While Beryl was walking blindly into the red zone, time moved slowly in the Monarch room. It had been more than 20 minutes since Shaq placed his order, and for that same amount of time, he sat alone. No water, no inquiry, no staff member stopping by. Meanwhile, Beryl had transformed into the image of a model server, but only for the guests she deemed worthy. She beamed at the couple at table 6, pouring a $780 bottle of Margaux 2015 with practiced elegance, accompanied by a light-hearted joke that made the guests laugh. She suggested Spanish manchego cheese for dessert to the VIP table near the bar, ordered in fluent French, and made sure to emphasize, "With guests like you, we always strive to provide the highest standard of experience." But every time she walked past table 19, where Shaq remained seated in silence, her expression changed, indifferent, purposefully avoiding eye contact, as if he didn't exist. She even continued speaking loudly as she passed, just enough for nearby tables to hear. "No reservation? Dressed like that and thinks he can walk into the Monarch room? Bet he'll vanish like a magician when the bill comes." That comment didn't just strike at one man's dignity. It shook the conscience of those watching. The Welsh family, who had observed the entire situation, could no longer maintain their usual composure. "She's undermining the core value of this place," Mrs. Welsh said quietly, but with steel in her voice. The Monarch Room was honored for its no judgment policy by New York taste last year. And now, Mr. Welsh nodded, setting his glass down on the table. "If someone can be judged for what they wear, then the idea of class here is just paint on the surface." At the next table, Gwen, who had been watching from the beginning, could no longer hide her frustration. "She's playing a control game through silence," she said to her friend, "trying to provoke him into getting upset, into reacting. But he's not taking the bait, and that's what's driving her mad." Shaq remained the same, a boulder in the stream of emotional currents. He didn't call the manager, didn't request another server, didn't look around for help. He sat upright, occasionally gazing at the chandelier above, its crystals gently spinning in the soft airflow. From time to time, he flipped through the menu as if reviewing options for a corporate dinner. A few times, he nodded subtly in rhythm with the music, quietly appreciating the trio playing Take 5 on the side stage. Inside the kitchen, Chef Mario, who had met Shaq at a shareholders' meeting 2 years ago, was prepping a main course for another table when he caught sight of him. His eyes widened in shock. "Damn. Shaq? Why is he sitting there? And why hasn't anyone served him?" He glanced around and tugged at a colleague's sleeve. "Get Brian," the manager, "to the front desk now. Something's not right." At that very moment, Beryl was fully absorbed in her next performance at a newly arrived VIP table, a young entrepreneurial couple from Chicago, invited personally by the restaurant's owner. She used her sweetest voice to introduce the $220 Royal Acetra caviar, making sure to emphasize, "This dish, of course, isn't something everyone has the palate to appreciate." She turned and walked away, confident she had just delivered another flawless round of service. But behind her, at table 19, Shaq's silence had become an invisible force. It didn't just cast Beryl as the clearest antagonist in the eyes of the guests. It caused the gazes surrounding him to shift, from distant to curious, and from curious to admiring. A middle-aged woman walking past Shaq's table on her way to the restroom paused briefly and spoke softly. "I don't know what's going on, but you're an incredibly patient man." Shaq smiled. "Thank you. I'm just enjoying how people treat each other." The trap had been set by Beryl, the dismissiveness, the sarcasm, the dominance. But no one fell for it. Not Shaq. Not the guests. Not the other staff. On the contrary, it was she, the one steering the game, who was slowly slipping into the pit she had dug for someone else. And in just a few minutes, she would realize disrespect, once witnessed by a collective, ceases to be a personal flaw and becomes a systemic failure. After nearly 30 minutes of deliberate delay, Beryl finally appeared at table 19, but not with the attentiveness of a professional server, rather with the air of someone reluctantly bestowing a privilege. In her hands was a silver tray, carrying what was considered the pinnacle dish of the Monarch Room's evening menu, the $350 filet mignon Rossini, featuring velvet-smooth French foie gras atop a perfectly seared Black Angus tenderloin, all draped in Alba white truffle demi-glace, a dish not only expensive, but one that demanded the highest culinary skill from the executive chef. Such a dish was typically served with great ceremony. The chair pulled out for the guest, an introduction of ingredients, a suggested wine pairing. But not tonight. Not for Shaq. Not with Beryl. She walked slowly, the clicks of her heels echoing clearly against the luxurious wooden floor, as if deliberately summoning attention. Eyes around the room began to follow. No one said anything, but everyone knew something was about to unfold. Beryl placed the plate on the table with more force than necessary, the metal cutlery chiming slightly. She leaned in, a smile mixing contempt and triumph. This dish is for those who truly understand the value of fine dining. I'm guessing this is your first time trying it, isn't it? Each word dropped like a pebble into a still lake, but that lake was Shaq. He looked up, eyes steady, unshaken, unoffended. He didn't even blink. That gaze was the answer itself. "Thank you for the recommendation," he said. His voice was low, calm but smoldering, like a jazz solo countering the moment with softness and heat. "I'll remember that." The words were gentle, but to Beryl's inflated pride, they landed like a silent slap. She paused half a second, then forced herself to recover, turning away with a triumphant smile, as if she had just won a hand of poker. But Beryl didn't realize she had just tied the noose of her own reputation in front of the entire restaurant. At table 12, Gwen tapped her finger on the table, voice tight with outrage. He just thanked her, after being publicly insulted. "Who is this man?" Her friend nodded, eyes still fixed on table 19. "Someone who doesn't need to raise his voice to show class. Someone who knows how to turn contempt into a lesson." At the center of the dining room, the Welsh family were no longer merely observing. They were now speaking openly. Mr. Welsh adjusted his glasses and spoke clearly. "Never have I seen a staff member treat a guest with such disrespect and still believe they're in the right." Mrs. Welsh nodded, her eyes sharper than ever. "No one here needs to know who he is. You just need to see the way he keeps silent. That alone tells you he's operating on a different level." Shaq gently lifted his knife, sliced into the filet mignon. He brought the piece of meat to his mouth, chewing slowly, as if this were the most ordinary dinner of the week. While the room held its breath, it was his calm demeanor that forced everyone to reconsider themselves, those who had snickered, doubted, or stayed silent. As for Beryl, after turning her back and walking toward the service counter, her heart no longer felt light. She heard the murmurs rising around her, felt the stares that were no longer sympathetic. Jake, the colleague she'd once overridden, stood nearby, looking at her with visible disappointment. "He just wanted dinner, and you treated him like a beggar." Beryl smirked, but didn't reply. What she didn't realize was that the undercurrent in the restaurant had shifted, and the man she tried to make into a joke was quietly becoming the center of an awakening. All eyes were no longer fixed on the $3,000 suits of Wall Street executives, but on the man in a wrinkled t-shirt and worn-out track pants, enjoying a fine dinner without needing to prove a thing. The steady click-clack of polished leather shoes echoed through the grand lobby of the Monarch Room. A staff member had just whispered something into the ear of a middle-aged man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, an Omega de Ville Trésor gleaming on his wrist, a symbol of calm and refined leadership. Brian, senior manager of the Monarch Room, formerly head of 3 Michelin-starred restaurant chains, was walking straight toward table 19. His face couldn't conceal his concern, but each step carried a deep respect, not for just any guest, but for a silent yet profoundly important partner. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath as Brian stopped, bowed slightly, and spoke in a deep, sincere tone. "Shaq, it's an honor to have you here tonight. I truly apologize for the delay in service. None of the staff were aware you'd be visiting." That sentence shattered the fragile balance of tension in the room. In an instant, murmurs surged like a wave. Shaq? As in, Shaquille O'Neal. Didn't he invest in the Monarch Room back in 2021? Oh my God, isn't he the one who started the Shaq Scholars Scholarship Program? Far off near the bar, Beryl turned to stone. Her hands clutched the silver tray until her knuckles turned white, eyes wide, cold sweat running down her back. Everything she had done, everything she had said, every snide comment, every condescending glance, now echoed in her mind 100-fold. She hadn't just insulted a VIP guest, not just a globally recognized figure. She had just insulted the silent owner of the place. What Beryl didn't know was that Shaq had quietly invested nearly $2.5 million into the Monarch Room when it was still a fledgling culinary startup. He never asked for his name to be displayed, never appeared in promotions. The only thing he requested in the one shareholders meeting he ever attended was, serve everyone as if they're the last person walking out of this world. No judgment, no discrimination. At table 12, Gwen set her wine glass down and whispered, barely hiding her admiration. She just turned herself from a server into a living warning for the entire service industry. Her friend nodded. And he doesn't need a nameplate. He just needs to show up. Shaq looked up at Brian, smiled gently, and said in his warm, deep voice, "It's all right, Brian. I just wanted to enjoy a meal like everyone else. But perhaps some things need to be reiterated." Brian understood instantly. He turned around, eyes colder than usual, fixed on the bar where Beryl now stood, frozen like a statue. Without a word, the surrounding staff already knew. A storm was coming. But not from Shaq, from the very system they were part of. Every diner, one by one, turned to look at Beryl. Their eyes no longer held curiosity, but disappointment, anger, and silent judgment. The Welsh family, still composed as ever, finally broke their silence. Mr. Welsh spoke clearly. "I worked over 30 years in various embassies. Never have I seen an employee so blatantly sabotage the core values of the establishment they represent." Beryl took a step back, her mouth slightly open as if to say something, but the words caught in her throat. She turned to Jake, the colleague she had long looked down on, but Jake simply bowed his head, saying nothing. She knew. She had hit bottom. Shaq remained seated, lifted his glass of water, and took a small sip. He didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to scold. The truth had already spoken. "I'm not here to cause a scene," he said to Brian. "I just hope that after tonight, we can reflect on what really defines the class of a restaurant." Brian nodded, eyes firm. "As soon as the restaurant closes, We'll hold a meeting. And you have full authority to request any adjustments. Beryl hadn't been fired, but everyone, guests, staff, and the room itself, had seen clearly what had just taken place. The room was eerily quiet. The jazz music had stopped at some point. All that remained was the steady breath of a space holding itself in, waiting for something greater than the menu and the lights. Shaquille O'Neal gently set his glass of water down. His large hands moved slowly, as if placing a period at the end of a long silence. He stood up. Not abruptly. Not the kind of dramatic rise seen in movies. Just a man, over 7 feet tall, built like a monument, rising to his feet in the middle of an elegant dining room. And somehow, when he stood, the entire restaurant seemed to lower its head. The golden lights cast softly across his face. His shadow stretched long across the polished walnut floor. His voice rang out, not loud, but just enough that every diner stopped their cutlery. I don't need anyone to know who I am to be treated with respect. The silence cracked open. No one moved. Not because I'm Shaquille O'Neal. Not because I'm an investor here. Not because I played in the NBA or because of how much is in my bank account. I don't need to wear a suit to be served a glass of water. He glanced around the room, eyes sweeping every table. Some guests looked down. Others met his gaze, eyes glistening. Everyone in here, myself included, and anyone who walks through those glass doors of the Monarch Room deserves respect. Not because of their wallet, not because of their shoes, but because they are human. A single clap broke the air. Gwen, at table 12, was the first. She stood, clapping steadily. Her face lit up, not by the lights, but by something newly awakened. Then came the Welsh couple. They didn't say a word. They simply stood, nodded at Shaq, and joined in the applause. The sound spread, like ripples across a lake after a stone's drop. But this applause wasn't loud or performative. It was deep, measured, because people weren't clapping for a person. They were clapping for a lesson. Beryl still stood near the bar, her entire body frozen. The words she had said, the smirks she had worn, they echoed now in the air. No one repeated them, but everyone remembered. She looked at Shaq. Their eyes met. There was no hatred in his gaze, but neither was there immediate forgiveness. There was only one silent question. What will you do with this lesson? Shaq didn't storm off. He took a step forward, resting one hand on the edge of the table. His voice, low and steady, carried the weight to stir every soul in the room. A restaurant is not just food or prices. It's a place where people meet. And when people are discriminated against here, the beauty of this restaurant dies before the dish even leaves the kitchen. He turned to Brian, the manager, who had been standing motionless the entire time. I didn't come here for someone to be fired. I came to remind everyone, real class isn't in the price of the meal. It's in how people treat each other, when there's no need to perform. Brian bowed his head. We understand. And we will act. Shaq exhaled softly, his shoulders relaxing, as if his work here was done. He smiled, picked up his napkin, dabbed the corner of his mouth, and sat back down to continue his meal. The restaurant, after a few stunned seconds, slowly returned to its dinner service. But the atmosphere had shifted, as if someone had opened every window, letting in a whole new breeze. Beryl wasn't fired, but she knew, from this day forward, she would either change completely or forever remain a living reminder of the lesson Shaq taught the entire room with. Not a single raised voice. 10:17 p.m. The glass doors of the Monarch Room closed behind the last guest. Tables had been cleared, napkins folded, the candles blown out. and the lighting left just dim enough to clearly illuminate each face in the room. Shaquille O'Neal remained, not to scold, not to command, but to have a conversation. The entire staff, about 18 people, stood in a circle in the main dining area. Some were still in their full-service uniforms. A few from the kitchen had just finished washing up, their aprons still on, hair damp with sweat. Everyone stood silent, not out of fear, but because they knew. This was the moment to reflect. Near the end of the circle was Beryl. Her hands clutched an order pad, eyes still red, despite having wiped them multiple times. She was no longer the gatekeeper of elegance from a few hours earlier. Now, she was just someone who had confronted the most uncomfortable truth about herself. Shaq stepped into the center of the circle. He didn't carry a microphone, didn't use a whiteboard, needed no props. His presence alone quieted the entire room. "I've made a lot of mistakes," he began. "When I was still playing, I judged people based on what I thought I knew. I used to look down on some folks just because they didn't look like me. But I learned, the hard way, that every person carries their own story, and we can't see it with our eyes." Shaq paused, eyes passing over every face. Then he stopped in front of Beryl. "I don't need an apology. I don't need anyone to be afraid of me." No one said a word. No one moved. And then, Beryl burst into tears. Not tears of shame, not tears of fear of being fired, but the cry of someone who had just taken off a mask she'd worn for far too long. "I was wrong," she choked out, words broken. "I judged you, and probably so many others, just by appearance. I thought I was protecting the restaurant's brand, but really, I was destroying it from the inside. I will change." She lifted her head, eyes red, but something in her gaze had changed. Gone was the arrogance of someone clinging to a sliver of power. In its place was the look of someone ready to start over. Shaq stepped forward, gently placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture full of forgiveness, but not of ease. "Change. Not to keep this job. Change for yourself. The world doesn't lack beautiful restaurants. What it lacks are people who serve with heart, not with eyes that classify." Brian, the manager, stood beside them, saying nothing. But in his eyes was relief, not because Shaq wasn't angry, but because someone like Shaq still believed people can change. The young woman at the bar, who had only been on the job for less than a month, quietly spoke up. "I think this is a lesson for all of us. I've heard people talk about silent discrimination in this industry. Tonight, I saw it with my own eyes." A young chef from the back kitchen nodded. "Once, I was turned away from a restaurant because I wore my gardening uniform. I'll never forget that feeling. And today, I saw someone, larger than life, treated just like I was back then." Shaq took a deep breath. He couldn't hide the emotion in his eyes, but his voice remained steady. "I didn't come here to judge anyone. I came to remind us all, whether server, guest, or manager, we each carry a responsibility to make this not just a restaurant, but a place where people feel welcomed." Beryl wiped her tears, and for the first time she smiled, not for anyone else, but for herself. A light, effortless smile, as if a burden had just been lifted. 11:42 p.m. The glass doors of the Monarch room closed quietly behind Shaquille O'Neal. There was no applause. No one rushed up for an autograph or a selfie. Only the soft yellow glow of Midtown Manhattan streetlights lit the bald head and towering frame of a man walking away, leaving behind a lesson greater than any photo could ever tell. A gentle breeze swept down 53rd Avenue, carrying the faint scent of crepe myrtles hanging from the lamppost baskets. Distant car horns echoed. The city remained alive. But inside Shaq, everything seemed to slow. He looked back at the building that housed the restaurant he had once poured his heart into as part of his mission after leaving the NBA. The Monarch Room, a name inspired by the monarch butterfly, symbol of rebirth and transformation, had finally fulfilled its original purpose, not merely serving food, but nurturing people. Shaq thought of Beryl, the woman who once considered herself a gatekeeper of status, but had broken down in tears during the final staff meeting. Not because she had been scolded, but because she realized the biggest barrier to becoming a better person was her own prejudice. He thought of Gwen, the young woman who bravely clapped first, choosing to side with what was right, even when no one else moved. Of the Welsh family, silent yet thoughtful witnesses, representing a seasoned generation that still believed in decency. And of Brian, the manager who didn't chase prestige or profit, but quietly rebuilt the restaurant's core values that very night. Respect isn't a privilege, nor should it be something traded for money or status, Shaq thought, as he stood waiting at the crosswalk. Respect should be the most ordinary thing in the world. A week after that night, the Monarch Room changed, but not through new signs, menus, or interior design. The most profound change was in how the staff looked at their guests and how they looked at themselves. Beryl didn't quit. She still served, but now greeted each guest not just with a prepared smile, but with genuine eye contact. She asked to join the in-house training team, where she shared her story as a lesson for new hires. Brian started hosting a 5-minute heart check before every shift, where staff could share experiences and feelings, free of judgment. Gwen and her friend became regulars, not just dining, but each month inviting one underprivileged student to dine for free, as a way to pay forward the goodness they had once witnessed. And starting that April, the Monarch Room added a small line printed at the bottom of every menu. Respect is not served. It is lived. That line was Shaq's idea. He asked for no credit, posted nothing on Instagram, but anyone who walked through those doors from that day forward felt seen. On the restaurant's Yelp page, the top-rated review wasn't about the filet mignon Rossini. It was a reflection from an anonymous guest, possibly anyone who had witnessed that evening. I used to think this was a restaurant for people with money, but I realized it's a place for people who recognize the value in others. And to me, that is worth more than any dish. Shaquille O'Neal, once known for dunks that shook the backboard, was now remembered in the culinary world as the man who taught an entire restaurant how to rise with dignity without making noise. And the Monarch Room, once a place that served only the refined, had become a symbol of a new kind of refinement, welcoming everyone with sincerity, not with eyes that measure who they are. And just like that, what seemed like a simple dinner became a wake-up call for an entire team. A lesson in respect, humility, and change, born not of anger, but of silence and unwavering grace. What do you think of how Shaq handled the situation? If you've ever witnessed a moment like this, share it in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Black Strength Stories so you won't miss more inspiring and powerful stories like this one.